In March 1944, a P-38J Lightning from the 55th Fighter Group suffered battle damage over Germany and force-landed near Kassel, falling intact into Luftwaffe hands before its pilot could destroy it. For German intelligence officers who had been studying reports of devastating American P-38 success in the Pacific Theater, where a pilot named Richard Bong had achieved 40 confirmed victories using specific energy tactics that exploited the Lightning's unique twin-engine advantages, this captured aircraft represented an opportunity to understand what made this twin boom fighter so deadly when flown using the tactics American aces had refined through combat experience. What these German evaluators would discover was that the P-38's combination of concentrated nose armament, sustained high-speed performance, and energy fighting capabilities created a weapon system that, in the hands of pilots trained in specific tactical doctrine, could dominate engagements through boom and zoom attacks that German fighters could not counter effectively, and that the 40-kill performance Bong achieved in the Pacific was not the result of facing inferior Japanese opponents, but rather the exploitation of aircraft capabilities through systematic tactics that would work equally well against any opponent who could be forced into energy-disadvantaged positions. This is the story of how German pilots and engineers evaluated the Lightning and discovered that American success with this aircraft was not accidental, but the result of deliberate tactical development exploiting specific aircraft characteristics, and how their reports documenting these capabilities arrived too late in a war where Germany could no longer develop counters to American tactical and technological advantages. Subscribe now for the untold stories of World War II's tactical innovations, where ace pilots like Richard Bong turned aircraft like the P-38 Lightning into 40-kill monsters not through luck or inferior opponents but through systematic exploitation of specific performance characteristics using energy tactics that German evaluators recognized as devastatingly effective but could not counter. We reveal how tactics and technology combine to determine air combat outcomes. Hit subscribe. March 24, 1944. Kassel Rothwesen Airfield, Germany. The morning is cold. Late winter still gripping central Germany with temperatures barely above freezing. The sky overcast with low clouds that brought snow flurries overnight. Visibility adequate but not ideal. Oberstleutnant Johann Steinhoff stands beside a hangar entrance, studying intelligence reports while waiting for the captured American fighter to be prepared for evaluation. The reports describe a phenomenon that has deeply troubled Luftwaffe intelligence: American P-38 Lightning pilots in the Pacific Theater achieving victory counts that exceed anything German aces are currently achieving in combat against Americans, with one pilot in particular, Major Richard Bong, having just achieved his 40th confirmed victory, making him America's highest-scoring ace. All 40 kills achieved in P-38 Lightnings, using specific tactics that intelligence reports describe in frustrating detail but that German commanders do not fully understand. Now, with the P-38J captured intact 3 days ago near Kassel when its pilot crash-landed after his aircraft was damaged by flak, Steinhoff and his evaluation team have the opportunity to fly this aircraft to understand its capabilities, and most importantly, to determine whether the tactics that made Bong so successful are dependent on facing inferior Japanese opponents, or whether they represent systematic exploitation of P-38 characteristics that would work equally well against German fighters. Steinhoff is 31 years old, 176 confirmed victories. One of the Luftwaffe's most analytical pilots who approaches combat as a chess game where understanding opponent capabilities determines strategy. He has read every available intelligence report on Bong's tactics provided by interrogations of captured American pilots, by analysis of gun camera footage recovered from downed P-38s, by reports from Japanese sources describing Bong's attack patterns, by technical intelligence evaluating the P-38's performance characteristics. The pattern that emerges from these reports is consistent and troubling. Bong uses energy tactics almost exclusively, attacking from altitude with speed advantage, firing a concentrated burst from the P-38's nose-mounted armament, then extending away using the P-38's superior speed before climbing back to altitude to reset for another attack. He rarely dogfights, rarely allows opponents to force him into turning combat where maneuverability would determine outcomes, refuses to engage when he lacks energy advantage. The tactics are disciplined, patient, methodical, completely different from the swirling dogfighting that characterizes much air combat and that German tactical doctrine emphasizes. Bong's success rate is extraordinary. 40 victories with only one instance of battle damage requiring early return to base. No injuries, no forced landings, no close calls that would indicate tactical errors. The success suggests that his tactics are not just effective but sustainable. That energy fighting eliminates much of the randomness and risk that characterizes traditional dogfighting. The intelligence reports describe Bong's typical engagement in detail that Steinhoff finds both informative and intimidating. Bong positions his P-38 at altitude above expected enemy patrol areas, typically at 25,000 to 30,000 feet, waiting and watching. When enemy aircraft are sighted below, he analyzes the tactical situation, identifies the most vulnerable target, usually a straggler or an aircraft separated from formation, plans an attack that maximizes speed advantage while minimizing exposure time. He rolls inverted, pulls through into a steep dive, accelerating rapidly to speeds exceeding 450 miles per hour, closing on the target from an angle the enemy cannot easily observe, typically from the high rear quarter or from directly astern if sun position allows, at approximately 400 to 600 yards range. Close enough that the P-38's concentrated nose armament creates a dense pattern, but far enough that he has time to break off if the target maneuvers. He fires a 2 to 3 second burst from all 4.50 caliber machine guns and single 20 mm cannon, over 200 rounds of .50 caliber and 30 rounds of 20 mm in that brief burst. The combined firepower, all converging on the target from nose-mounted guns that require no convergence calculation, destroys or cripples most aircraft hit by even a portion of the burst. Bong then continues diving away, extending to at least 2 miles distance before pulling up into a zoom climb that converts his excess speed to altitude, positioning him at equal or greater altitude than remaining enemy aircraft, ready to repeat the process. The tactics seem simple, almost obvious, but intelligence reports indicate that most pilots cannot execute them successfully because they require discipline to wait for perfect opportunities rather than engaging immediately, altitude awareness to maintain energy advantage constantly, marksmanship to achieve kills with brief firing opportunities, and most critically, an aircraft with specific performance characteristics: high speed at altitude, good acceleration in dives, efficient zoom climb to convert speed to altitude, and heavy concentrated firepower effective at the ranges these attacks occur. The P-38 possesses all these characteristics. German fighters possess some but not all. The Bf-109G has good climb but relatively slow speed at altitude and limited dive performance. The FW-190A has excellent dive performance but limited climb and turn characteristics. Neither German fighter has nose-mounted armament. Both use wing-mounted guns requiring convergence calculations that complicate gunnery at varying ranges. The question Steinhoff needs to answer is whether Bong's tactics work only against less capable Japanese fighters or whether they represent fundamental exploitation of P-38 capabilities that would be equally effective against German fighters. Behind Steinhoff, 3 other officers wait in the cold morning, all selected for specific expertise relevant to understanding the P-38 and its tactical employment. Major Gunther Rowell, 32 years old, 275 victories, one of Germany's most successful aces who has extensive experience fighting American fighters over Germany and understands how energy tactics differ from traditional dogfighting. Hauptmann Heinz Bauer, 30 years old, 220 victories, specialized in high-altitude interception and equipped to analyze the P-38's altitude performance. And Major Wilhelm Herget, 27 years old, 72 victories primarily against 4-engine bombers, bringing perspective on how concentrated nose armament affects hit probability and lethality. These 4 pilots collectively represent over 720 confirmed victories, thousands of hours of combat experience, and growing understanding that American tactical doctrine has evolved in ways that exploit aircraft capabilities more systematically than German doctrine, which emphasizes individual initiative and dogfighting skill. The P-38J has been made airworthy in 3 days of intensive work by Luftwaffe mechanics impressed by the aircraft's construction quality and intimidated by its complexity. The damage from the forced landing was moderate. Bent propellers requiring replacement with propellers from another crashed P-38. Damaged engine cowling requiring repair with sheet metal patches. Hydraulic system leaks requiring seal replacements. The twin Allison V1710 engines were inspected thoroughly, found to be mechanically sound despite the rough landing, and test run extensively before being cleared for flight. German mechanics noted during the restoration that the P-38 uses electric systems for many functions. German fighters handle mechanically or hydraulically, electric propeller pitch control, electric gun firing, electric flap operation, electric trim adjustment. The electrical complexity adds weight but provides reliability and reduces pilot workload. The concentrated nose armament is particularly impressive to mechanics who are accustomed to wing-mounted gun installations requiring complex ammunition feed systems and convergence adjustments. The P-38's 4.50 caliber Brownings and 120mm Hispano are all mounted in the nose below the cockpit, fed by ammunition boxes housed in the forward fuselage, firing directly along the aircraft's center line. There's no convergence to set, no need to adjust gun alignment for different combat ranges. The pilot simply points the aircraft at the target and fires, knowing every bullet and shell travels the same path. Steinhoff walks around the P-38, examining its configuration with the eye of a pilot who has seen many aircraft, but never one quite like this. The twin-boom layout is unusual, unconventional by German standards where single-engine fighters dominate. The configuration places engines in the booms, cockpit and armament in the central nacelle, tail surfaces connecting the booms. The arrangement provides several tactical advantages that Steinhoff mentally catalogs. First, pilot visibility is excellent with the cockpit positioned high and forward. No engine blocking forward view, excellent fields of view in all directions. Second, the nose armament creates concentrated firepower without convergence issues, simplifying gunnery and increasing hit probability. Third, the twin engines provide redundancies. If one engine is damaged, the pilot can return to base on the other, whereas single-engine fighters suffering engine damage must force land or bail out. Fourth, the engines are separated by 12 feet, making it nearly impossible for a single burst of enemy fire to damage both engines simultaneously, providing survivability advantage. The configuration also has disadvantages: complexity of managing two engines, weight penalty of twin-boom structure, larger size and greater visibility, making the aircraft easier to spot. But overall, Steinhoff assesses the configuration makes tactical sense for the mission that P-38 performs. Long-range escort and fighter sweep operations where reliability and endurance matter more than minimum size or weight. The armament installation in the nose draws Steinhoff's particular attention because intelligence reports emphasize that Bong's success depends heavily on the P-38's concentrated firepower and the accuracy this configuration provides. The 4.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns are mounted in a square pattern, 2 on each side of the 20mm Hispano cannon in the center, all 5 barrels projecting from the nose within an area approximately 12 inches in diameter. At typical combat ranges of 400 to 600 yards, quote, the bullet pattern from all 4 machine guns covers approximately a 10-foot circle, while the cannon shells travel the same path as the machine gun bullets. Any target within that 10-foot circle is struck by machine gun fire and cannon shells simultaneously, creating devastating effect. Steinhoff knows from his own experience that wing-mounted guns on German fighters have convergence patterns that create either wide dispersal at ranges outside the convergence distance or dangerous concentration at very close range, but with gaps in the pattern at other ranges. The P-38's nose armament eliminates these compromises, creating a consistent, effective cone of fire at all ranges from close to distant. Intelligence reports indicate that Bong typically opens fire at ranges where German pilots would consider too distant for effective shooting, 600 yards or more, but achieves hits because his rounds are all traveling parallel paths rather than converging paths, and because the 50 caliber machine gun has relatively flat trajectory, allowing accurate long-range shooting. Steinhoff climbs into the P-38's cockpit through the left side entry door. Unique configuration compared to German fighters that use canopy entry or side entry hatches. The cockpit is spacious, comfortable, well arranged with controls positioned logically. The control wheel is standard, the rudder pedals conventional, but there are 2 throttle levers, one for each engine, requiring the pilot to manage both simultaneously or accept asymmetric thrust. The instrument panel is comprehensive with engine instruments for both engines, flight instruments, tactical instruments. Everything needed to manage the complex aircraft systems. A German mechanic, Oberfeldwebel Klaus Weber, who led the restoration effort, briefs Steinhoff on startup and operation procedures translated from the captured flight manual. Weber emphasizes that both engines must be started and warmed carefully, that managing 2 engines requires attention to keeping them synchronized, that the turbochargers are automatic but can be manually controlled if needed, that coolant temperatures must be monitored carefully to prevent overheating that would damage engines. The briefing takes 20 minutes, longer than needed for single-engine fighters but necessary for the P-38's complexity. Steinhoff starts both engines sequentially, the Allison V1710s catching and settling into smooth idle with the characteristic V12 sound. He monitors instruments as engines warm, checking that oil pressures and temperatures are normal for both engines, that all systems are functioning. The complexity of managing 2 engines is immediately apparent. He must scan twice as many gauges, verify twice as many parameters, think about asymmetric thrust if one engine produces different power than the other. But he also recognizes the advantage. If one engine fails, he can continue flying and return to base safely, whereas single-engine failure in a BF-109 or FW-190 means forced landing. He releases brakes, advances both throttles together, taxis toward the runway. The tricycle landing gear makes taxiing straightforward. Nose wheel providing steerable control, forward visibility excellent. At the runway threshold, he performs pre-takeoff checks for both engines, confirms all parameters are normal, then advances both throttles to take off power. The P-38 accelerates down the runway, 3,200 horsepower, driving it forward with impressive authority. At 120 miles per hour, he rotates and the Lightning leaps into the air, climbing strongly at 3,000 feet per minute. Steinhoff retracts landing gear, retracts flaps, reduces to climb power, and climbs toward altitude where he will test the performance characteristics that enable Bong's tactics. He passes through 20,000 feet, 25,000 feet, noting that climb rate remains good despite altitude increase, a turbocharger's maintaining engine power as air thins. At 30,000 feet, 9,000 meters, he levels off. This is approximately the altitude where Bong typically positions before attacking, high enough to observe aircraft below, high enough that speed advantage from diving is substantial, high enough that most opponents cannot easily climb to counter him. Steinhoff accelerates to cruising speed, 300 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, comfortable speed for patrol operations. Then he begins the test sequence that will determine whether Bong's tactics are dependent on aircraft performance, capabilities that German fighters lack, or whether German pilots could execute similar tactics if they adopted the appropriate doctrine. First test. Dive acceleration from 30,000 feet to 20,000 feet to simulate the attack phase of Bong's typical engagement. Steinhoff rolls inverted, pulls through into 60-degree dive, allows speed to build. At 25,000 feet, speed is 380 miles per hour. At 22,000 feet, 430 miles per hour. At 20,000 feet, 470 miles per hour indicated airspeed. The acceleration is impressive, the P-38 gaining speed rapidly in the dive, easily reaching speeds that would provide overwhelming advantage over most aircraft operating at cruise speeds. He begins recovery at 20,000 feet, pulling steadily, the heavy structure absorbing guy loads without complaint, leveling at 19,000 feet after using 1,000 feet altitude for recovery. The dive performance is excellent, confirming that the P-38 can rapidly achieve high speeds from altitude advantage, crucial for boom and zoom tactics where speed differential determines success. Second test. Zoom climb from 20,000 feet back to 30,000 feet to simulate the extension and repositioning phase after an attack. From level flight at 400 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, Steinhoff pulls up into 45-degree climb, trading speed for altitude. The P-38 climbs strongly, the zoom climb carrying him through 22,000 feet, 25,000 feet, 28,000 feet, finally reaching 29,500 feet before speed decays to 180 miles per hour and he must level off or risk stalling. The zoom climb gained 9,500 feet, nearly returning him to his starting altitude, demonstrating that the P-38 can convert excess speed to altitude gain efficiently, resetting tactical advantage for another attack. A Bf-109G performing the same zoom climb from 400 miles per hour would gain perhaps 7,500 feet before stalling. The P-38's better energy retention allows more effective repositioning after attacks. Third test. Sustain speed at altitude to determine whether the P-38 can maintain speed advantage during extended combat. Steinhoff climbs back to 30,000 feet, accelerates to maximum speed at military power. The airspeed stabilizes at 360 miles per hour, indicated at 30,000 feet. Respectable speed for this altitude where air density is less than one-third sea level density. By comparison, a Bf-109G6 achieves approximately 310 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, 50 miles per hour slower. The FW-190A8 achieves approximately 290 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, 70 miles per hour slower. The P-38's speed advantage at altitude is substantial, allowing it to engage or disengage at will, dictating combat terms. Even more significantly, Steinhoff maintains this speed for 20 minutes continuously at military power, and the engines show no signs of overheating, no temperature increases requiring power reduction. The P-38 can sustain combat power indefinitely at altitude, while German fighters must carefully manage engine temperatures to avoid damage during prolonged high-power operations. Fourth test. Gunnery simulation to understand how the nose-mounted armament affects hit probability. Steinhoff does not fire the guns, ammunition is limited, and German command wants to preserve it for detailed ballistic testing. But he simulates attacks by positioning the gun sight on reference points at various ranges and angles. At 600 yards range in a stern chase with target at same altitude. He finds the gun sight placement is simple. Point the aircraft at the target, lead slightly for target motion, fire. No complex calculations for convergence, no need to estimate range precisely, the pilot simply aims the entire aircraft. At 400 yards range in a diving attack with target below, the gunnery solution is similarly straightforward. Aim point slightly ahead of target to account for target motion during bullet time of flight, fire. The nose armament makes gunnery significantly easier than wing-mounted guns where the pilot must estimate range. Apply proper convergence, account for different bullet trajectories from left and right wings. Steinhoff estimates that the P-38's nose armament increases hit probability by 30 to 40% compared to wing-mounted guns at typical combat ranges, explaining how Bong achieves kills with brief firing opportunities where German pilots would require longer bursts or multiple passes. Fifth test, the complete tactical sequence simulating Bong's attack pattern from intelligence reports. Steinhoff positions at 30,000 feet, identifies an imaginary target at 25,000 feet, plans an attack from high rear quarter. He rolls inverted, pulls through into dive aimed at the target position, accelerates to 450 miles per hour by the time he would reach firing range, simulates firing a 3-second burst, then continues diving away in a shallow dive that maintains speed while separating from the target area. At 2 miles distance from the target, he pulls up into zoom climb, trading speed for altitude, regaining 28,000 feet before leveling off. The entire sequence took 90 seconds from initiating dive to regaining altitude. The altitude loss was 2,000 feet, manageable and acceptable. The energy expenditure was moderate. He could repeat this attack sequence multiple times before fuel or ammunition exhaustion forced return to base. Most importantly, the tactical sequence never placed him in a position where an opponent could icily counterattack. He approached fast from altitude advantage, attacked briefly, extended fast before opponents could react, climbed back to altitude advantage before opponents could pursue effectively. The tactics exploit the P-38's specific advantages: speed at altitude and energy retention, avoiding situations where German fighters' advantages in turn, performance, or acceleration might be decisive. After 3 hours of intensive testing exploring every aspect of the P-38's performance that enables Bong's tactics, Steinhoff returns to Karsel. The landing is straightforward, the tricycle gear making touchdowns simple. He shuts down both engines, sits in the cockpit processing what he learned. The P-38 is not superior to German fighters in every performance category. It turns more slowly than the Bf-109. It accelerates more slowly than the FW-190A at low altitude. It is less agile in rolling maneuvers. But in the specific performance characteristics that matter for energy fighting, boom and zoom tactics, the systematic approach Bong uses to achieve 40 victories, the P-38 is comprehensively superior. It maintains better speed at altitude. It retains energy better in zoom climbs. It can sustain high-power operations without overheating. And critically, its nose-mounted armament makes gunnery significantly easier and more effective. Bong's success is not the result of luck or inferior opponents. It is the systematic exploitation of specific aircraft characteristics through disciplined tactics that German pilots could theoretically replicate if they had aircraft with similar capabilities and if they adopted similar tactical discipline. But German fighters lack the necessary performance characteristics, and German tactical doctrine emphasizes different approaches. Raoul flies next, bringing perspective from 275 victories and extensive experience fighting American aircraft. He conducts the same test sequence Steinhoff performed, confirming all findings, then performs additional tests to determine whether German fighters could execute similar tactics with modifications to doctrine. His conclusion is that energy tactics like Bong uses require specific aircraft capabilities that German fighters have only partially. The Bf-109G can climb well and has acceptable dive performance, but lacks speed at altitude and cannot sustain high power long enough for extended energy fighting. The FW-190A has excellent dive performance but lacks climb performance to regain altitude after attacks and lacks speed at altitude where much combat occurs. Neither German fighter has concentrated nose armament, making gunnery as straightforward as the P-38's configuration. Raoult concludes that adopting Bong-style tactics with current German fighters would be marginally more effective than current dogfighting emphasis, but would not achieve the success rates Bong demonstrates because aircraft capabilities limit execution. Bauer focuses on high-altitude performance, conducting detailed tests at altitudes from 25,000 to 35,000 feet. He confirms that the P-38's turbochargers maintain power at altitudes where German fighters suffer significant power loss, that speed advantage at altitude is substantial, that sustained operations at altitude are possible in the P-38 where German fighters must carefully manage limited high-altitude capability. His analysis identifies the turbochargers as the key enabling technology, automatically adjusting boost pressure to maintain engine power as altitude increases, allowing the pilot to focus on tactics rather than engine management. German fighters use mechanically driven superchargers with fixed gear ratios, providing good power at one specific altitude but losing effectiveness above and below that altitude. The P-38's automatic turbochargers provide good power across a wide altitude band. Tactical flexibility German fighters lack. Herget examines the armament effectiveness through technical analysis and ballistics testing. He fires the captured P-38's guns in controlled tests, documenting that at 600 yards range the 4 50 caliber machine guns and 20 mm cannon create a pattern approximately 10 feet in diameter, that approximately 70% of rounds pass through the center 6-foot circle. That hit probability against fighter-sized target at this range is approximately 35% for a skilled pilot, compared to approximately 20% for wing-mounted guns requiring convergence calculations. At 400 yards, hit probability increases to 55% for nose-mounted guns versus 35% for wing-mounted guns. The firepower advantage combined with higher hit probability explains how Bong achieves kills with brief firing opportunities. 3-second bursts delivering approximately 230 50 caliber rounds and 30 20mm shells, statistically achieving approximately 130 hits on target at 400 yards range. Devastating concentration of fire that destroys most aircraft. March 28, 1944. The evaluation team compiles findings into comprehensive report titled Tactical and Technical Analysis of P-38, Lightning and American Energy Fighting Doctrine for Distribution to Luftwaffe Operational Commands, Fighter Training Schools and Tactical Development Offices. Steinhoff writes the core tactical analysis, carefully analyzing how Bong's methods exploit P-38 capabilities and whether German fighters could adopt similar approaches. The report begins by acknowledging that American fighter pilot Richard Bong has achieved 40 confirmed victories in the Pacific theater, all in P-38 Lightnings, using tactics that differ fundamentally from traditional dogfighting. Bong's methods emphasize energy advantage, altitude advantage, speed advantage, attacking only when these advantages provide overwhelming superiority, declining combat when advantages are absent. The tactics are disciplined, patient, methodical, achieving consistent success with minimal risk. The P-38 Lightning, Steinhoff continues, possesses specific characteristics that enable these tactics. First, excellent high-altitude performance through turbochargers maintaining engine power to 30,000 feet and above, allowing operations at altitudes where few opponents can compete effectively. Second, good dive acceleration allowing rapid speed buildup from altitude advantage, creating speed differential that overwhelms opponents. Third, efficient energy retention in zoom climbs allowing conversion of speed to altitude, resetting tactical advantage after each attack. Fourth, concentrated nose armament simplifying gunnery and increasing hit probability at all ranges. Fifth, heavy firepower delivering devastating damage with brief bursts. Sixth, twin-engine redundancy providing survivability advantage. The combination creates an aircraft optimized for boom and zoom tactics, for energy fighting that avoids sustained maneuvering combat, for systematic exploitation of altitude and speed advantages. German fighters, Steinhoff writes diplomatically but honestly, lack several of these characteristics. The Bf-109G has good climb but lacks speed at altitude and has wing-mounted armament reducing gunnery effectiveness. The FW-1908 has excellent dive performance but lacks high-altitude speed and climb, also has wing-mounted armament. Neither fighter has twin-engine redundancies. Neither fighter has turbochargers providing automatic power management at altitude. Neither fighter can sustain high-power operations as long as the P-38 without overheating. The performance gaps are not enormous in any single category but compound to create significant tactical disadvantages when fighting against P-38s flown using proper energy tactics. German pilots can partially adopt energy fighting methods, emphasizing altitude advantage in boom and zoom attacks, but cannot execute with the consistency or safety that Bong achieves because aircraft limitations force compromises. The report recommends several responses, acknowledging that none fully counter the P-38 threat, but that combinations might reduce American tactical advantages. First, train German pilots in energy fighting fundamentals, emphasizing altitude advantage and refusing disadvantageous engagements, even if this contradicts traditional aggressive doctrine. Second, develop tactics for forcing P-38s into slow-speed maneuvering combat where German fighter advantages in turn performance might be decisive, though acknowledging that skilled P-38 pilots like Bong simply disengage when opponents attempt this. Third, prioritize high-altitude intercept capabilities, positioning German fighters at altitudes where P-38s typically patrol, eliminating American altitude advantage. Fourth, develop improved high-altitude fighter variants with better performance above 25,000 feet, though this requires engine development that may not be achievable within relevant timeframes. Fifth, accept that P-38s flown by skilled pilots using proper tactics represent near-ideal exploitation of energy fighting doctrine, that countering them requires either superior aircraft or tactical innovations not yet identified. The report includes detailed appendix analyzing Bong's known victories from intelligence sources, identifying patterns in his tactical choices. Of 40 victories, 32 were achieved through diving attacks from altitude advantage, 6 through level attacks from co-altitude with speed advantage, 2 through opportunistic attacks on damaged or distracted opponents. 0 victories were achieved through sustained turning combat. His attacks typically occurred within 15 to 30 seconds of initial engagement, brief violent encounters rather than extended dogfights. His firing bursts averaged 2 to 4 seconds, brief compared to typical German bursts of 5 to 8 seconds, but achieving higher hit rates due to nose-mounted armament and disciplined fire control. His ammunition expenditure averaged 60 rounds per victory, remarkably efficient compared to German averages of 200 to 300 rounds per victory, reflecting both accuracy advantages from nose armament and discipline to fire only when hit probability is high. The statistics demonstrate that Bong's success is systematic, not random, based on tactical discipline and aircraft capabilities working together. The report, 137 pages including tactical diagrams, performance data, intelligence summaries, and recommendations, is dated March 30th, 1944. Classified Geheim, secret, distributed through Luftwaffe channels. Reaches various commands through April, generating mixed reactions. Operational commanders acknowledge the analysis is accurate, recognizing that American fighters increasingly employ energy tactics that German fighters struggle to counter. Training commands begin incorporating energy fighting concepts into curricula, teaching altitude awareness and boom and zoom methods, though emphasizing that German aircraft limitations prevent fully replicating American approaches. Tactical development offices study the report, seeking innovations to counter P-38s and energy fighting doctrine, concluding that without aircraft with better high-altitude performance and concentrated nose armament, tactical solutions are limited. The report influences German fighter tactics marginally but cannot fundamentally change outcomes when aircraft capabilities limit execution. Meanwhile, in the Pacific Theater, Richard Bong continues his combat tour, his victory count climbing through 41, eventually reaching 40 confirmed victories, making him America's ace of aces. He achieves this through the tactics German evaluators documented: altitude advantage, speed advantage, boom and zoom attacks, disciplined fire control, nose-mounted armament, energy fighting that avoids sustained maneuvering. His methods become doctrine for American P-38 squadrons, taught systematically to new pilots, refined through combat experience, shared across units. Other P-38 pilots achieve significant success using similar tactics. Thomas Maguire achieves 38 victories using methods nearly identical to Bong's. Charles MacDonald achieves 27 victories. Gerald Johnson, 22 victories, all emphasizing energy tactics over dogfighting. The cumulative effect is that P-38 squadrons achieve very favorable kill ratios, establishing air superiority over areas they operate, contributing significantly to Allied victory in Pacific Air Campaign. Bong survives his combat tour, is withdrawn from combat after 40 victories, becomes test pilot. Tragically dies in August 1945 when the P-80 jet fighter he is testing crashes on takeoff. His tactical legacy survives, influencing post-war fighter doctrine, emphasizing energy management and boom and zoom tactics. Post-war analysis by aviation historians and military theorists examines why Bong's tactics were so effective and why they represented evolution in fighter combat doctrine. The conclusion is that Bong recognized earlier than most pilots that sustained dogfighting, while visually dramatic and requiring significant skill, is also dangerous, consumes time and fuel inefficiently, and creates opportunities for opponents to achieve advantageous positions through lucky maneuvers or numerical superiority. Energy tactics, by contrast, minimize exposure time, maximize kill probability per attack, preserve tactical advantage throughout engagement, allow escape if situation becomes unfavorable. The tactics require discipline to wait for perfect opportunities rather than engaging immediately, altitude awareness to maintain energy advantage, marksmanship to achieve kills with brief attacks. But pilots who master these requirements achieve much better success rates and survivability than pilots relying on dogfighting skills. Bong's 40 victories with minimal damage demonstrates the effectiveness of this approach. The P-38 evaluation by German pilots confirmed that Bong's success was not due to inferior opponents but to systematic exploitation of aircraft capabilities that German fighters lacked. The turbochargers providing high-altitude performance, the nose armament providing gunnery advantages, the twin engines providing redundancy, the structural strength allowing sustained high-speed operations, all contributed to creating an aircraft optimized for energy fighting. The Germans understood this after evaluating the captured P-38, but lacked resources and time to develop equivalent aircraft, or to modify existing fighters to compete effectively. The report documented the problem accurately but offered no achievable solutions, becoming another example of German awareness of their tactical and technological disadvantages without being able to affect outcomes. Steinhoff survives the war with 176 victories, serves in post-war Luftwaffe, retires as general, dies in 2012 at 90. In a 1998 interview, He reflects on the P-38 evaluation and what it revealed about American tactical development. The Americans approached fighter combat systematically, he says, analyzing what tactics produced best results, determining what aircraft characteristics enabled those tactics, designing aircraft specifically to excel at preferred tactics, training pilots specifically in doctrine that exploited aircraft capabilities. Germans approached fighter combat emphasizing individual initiative, pilot skill, aggressive spirit, designing versatile aircraft that could dogfight or boom on zoom, training pilots in general skills rather than specific doctrine. The American approach produced more consistent results, he says, better average performance from typical pilots, higher survival rates, more victories per pilot. Bong was exemplar of this systematic approach, he says, perfect execution of doctrine that exploited specific aircraft capabilities. His 40 victories were not luck, he says. They were the inevitable result of proper tactics properly executed in an aircraft designed for those tactics. The broader lesson the P-38 evaluation offered was that modern air combat increasingly favored energy tactics over dogfighting. That altitude and speed advantages combined with heavy firepower created more effective fighting methods than maneuverability and extended maneuver in combat. This lesson influenced post-war jet fighter design, where high speed and energy retention became primary design goals, where maneuverability became secondary consideration, where concentrated armament and later missiles allowed kills from greater ranges with briefer attacks. The P-38 and Bong's tactics represented transitional step from traditional dogfighting toward modern energy, fighting that dominates jet combat. German evaluators recognized this in 1944 but could not respond effectively because German aviation was already committed to design philosophies and tactical doctrines that emphasized different characteristics. The P-38 evaluation revealed that Richard Bong's 40 victories were achieved through systematic exploitation of specific aircraft characteristics using energy tactics that German fighters could not effectively counter, that nose-mounted armament and high-altitude performance enabled boom on zoom, attacks with 35% hit probability at 600 yards, and that American tactical doctrine had evolved to emphasize sustained performance and disciplined energy fighting over dogfighting skill. German evaluators understood this but lacked aircraft capabilities to replicate American success. If you want more stories about how tactics and technology combined to determine air combat outcomes in World War II, subscribe now. We publish these tactical analyses every week. Thanks for watching.